I'm John McQuay with 8541 Tactical, and this is Mail Call Mondays, the show that answers your questions about precision rifles, optics, and equipment. We're here on another Monday to answer your questions, and our first question starts off with Just Call Me Roe. He says, how do you keep buildup from accumulating on the crown of your barrel under a muzzle brake, and what's the safest way to remove it without damaging your crown? Well, the safest way to remove it is just don't do it. I pretty much leave that stuff on there because it really, with most muzzle brakes, it's not going to accumulate to the point where it causes any issues. So if you have to remove the muzzle brake for whatever purpose, to rebarrel the rifle, then you can go in there and clean it out of the muzzle brake, but obviously you don't worry about the crown then if you're rebarreling the rifle. If it really starts to just get at you and you absolutely have to do something about it, then what I would suggest is get you a toothbrush or a GP brush. A military style GP brush works better with those nylon bristles on it, and get in there with your favorite carbon solvent and attack it with those nylon bristles, because they're not actually going to do anything to scrape or scratch the crown or cause you any problems. But really, in my opinion, just leave it be, and it's not going to do anything. It's going to build up evenly, and then it's going to be a self-limiting process. It's not going to build up to the point that it's going to cause any problems. So if it just absolutely eats at you, then go ahead and get in there. Just do not do what we were taught to do in the Marine Corps with the M16A2, and that's take a steel cleaning rod and get down in there and chip that stuff away with a steel cleaning rod, because it will just really tear up that crown and the rifle will not shoot to its best. Our next question comes from Jason, and Jason asks, if you find that you're not getting the groupings you're looking for out of your hand loads, what's the first thing you change? Type of powder, bullet brand, or bullet weight? Well, Jason, any of those would be a good option to change if you're just looking to get better performance out of your hand loads. What I generally do is I will start with known good components. For instance, if I'm going with a new load for a 308 rifle that I haven't loaded for before, then I'll go with Winchester or Federal brass that I know has performed well. I will choose a powder, for instance, Reloader 15, Varget, IMR 4064, something in that nature that I know is a good powder in that rifle, and then I will choose a bullet based on the twist rate of the barrel. Now once you have all that, you can shift those things around to try to see if you can get some better performance out of the cartridge that you're loading. And generally what has a great deal of difference is the bullet itself. Some throats will favor VLD bullets, some throats will favor more rounded profiles like you get with the Match Kings, so it just really depends there. I think if you are having some issues, then the first thing I would change would be the bullet type. I would go with a different bullet and do a completely new workup with that different bullet, assuming you're using a powder that's fairly standard for your cartridge. So try a different bullet, try different seating depths, and see where that gets you. But for me, generally I'm pretty lucky when I do my research and try to choose what I want to run in a rifle. And I almost always, if the rifle is capable of it, will choose a setup that will give me sub-MOA results. And a lot of that is just going on what other guys have done before, looking what's out there and making the choice amongst that. So I hope that gives you some ideas on how to tweak your hand loads and get a little bit better with that. If you haven't watched our Reloading 101 series, I highly suggest you go back and do that, because we have a lot of little tips and tricks in that series there. Our next question comes from Stefano. Stefano asks, trigger suggestion to replace the standard X mark on Remington 700. Great show, thanks for it. Well, what I suggest as far as a really good out-of-the-box, easy, ready-to-roll trigger is the Timney triggers, the 510 or the 517. This is a 517 right here, and the difference between the 510 and 517 is just the trigger bow. The 517 has a straight trigger, which may not work with some trigger guards. The 510 has a curved trigger that is similar to a more traditional Remington trigger, and that's what we have in here. This is the 510 trigger, and as you can see, clears the trigger guard in the LSS chassis here with no problem at all. These are great triggers. They come in a variety of pull weights if you go on Timney's website and order them. This one came from Brownells, and I believe it's set out of the box at like 3 pounds, 3.5 pounds, somewhere in there. But they're fairly easy to set on your own, and they are set up with a lock nut on there so you can make your adjustments and lock it down and be good to go. We had intended to do an installation video grabbing something like our Remington receiver that we have right here that has an old school trigger on it and show you how to put the Timney on it, and that just kind of got pushed back a little bit, and I apologize for that. We've had a lot of stuff going on here, and hopefully we'll get to that here real soon, but it really is not difficult. You pull 2 screws, you pull your action out of the stock. There are 2 pins that you punch out. You put the new trigger in, 2 pins back in. The only tricky part on the whole deal is making sure you get the bolt release spring back in correctly. When you slide it in, and make sure that when you punch the pins out, that your stock trigger doesn't let the sear go flying and you lose a spring and sear and all kinds of stuff. Other than that, it's really a quick process. We just haven't got a chance to get to it and film it yet. Levi asks, proper cheek weld pressure, too much versus too little? Well, Levi, if you are concentrating on cheek weld pressure, it's probably too much. What I recommend is when you get on the rifle, get into a nice comfortable position and then just completely relax. We're not worried about lining the sights up on the target. We're just worried about relaxing to get a feel for where our body should be on the rifle. When I get a cheek weld, I'm not mashing my face down into the rifle as long as I'm on one of my rifles. Every now and again when I get on somebody else's rifle, I really have to mash my face in there to get a proper eye relief or proper eye position behind the scope. But on my rifles, I set them up so that I can just drop my cheek on there, relax, and be in a good position. The old rule of thumb for a proper shooting position when you're in prone is you should be able to go to sleep behind the rifle without any problems. So we're not crushing that face in. The only pressure that we're putting down on that stock is basically the weight of your head supported by your neck leaning over on the comb. We're not crushing it in, we're not grinding it in, we're not trying to hold the stock down with our face. It's just sitting there. Now, on the opposite side, you don't want too little pressure. You don't want to just be feathering it on there, because as soon as you recoil, your face is going to move around on the stock. So just that light pressure of your head resting on the comb should keep you in place for most of the short action calibers that we're working with. And even going up into stuff like 338, I still use the same face pressure even if I'm shooting a 50 BMG. I just make sure I get that proper eye relief so it doesn't kiss me. But don't crush your face into it. Just get on the rifle and relax. And just that nice relaxed position should be enough pressure on the comb to do what you need to do. Chad asks, are there home modifications I can do to my bolt gun to increase accuracy? I'm running a stock Remington 700 Tactical in 308 with the standard black Hogue stock they come with. Love the show. Glad you're back with the MCM episodes. Well, Chad, thanks for watching. I'm glad that you're glad that we're back. And what I would recommend is go take a look at our budget precision project. It is very close to the rifle that you have. The rifle we use in the budget precision project was a Remington 700 AAC SD. And really the only difference between it and your rifle is the threaded barrel. So you know, your rifle will track right along what we did with that, and it gives you some ideas of some low-cost stuff you can do at home before we started jumping up and installing the high-dollar parts on it. So we'll leave a link down in the description below on that series, and please go check it out. Our next question comes from Nathan. Nathan asks, John, do you see any downsides to aluminum chassis versus traditional wood or fiberglass composite? Well, Nathan, I don't really see any downsides to them. Even when you get into the more expensive composite chassis, the fiberglass chassis, they will have an aluminum bedding block in it or aluminum pillars. An aluminum chassis just kind of circumvents all that, and you're just bolting the rifle right into the aluminum, and the aluminum is what all the extra stuff bolts onto. I really like the aluminum chassis because they are very versatile. You can get a lot of different designs, you can get a lot of different shapes, you can get a lot of different stuff to mount on them and set them up. Now, one advantage that you get with some of the composite chassis is that they may be a little bit more comfortable for you to hold on to if you're shooting in different positions. If you're looking at something, for instance, like a hunting rifle, some of the aluminum chassis go a little bit overboard with edges and contours and all kinds of stuff. And when you start grabbing onto them, sometimes it feels like you're grabbing onto a cheese grater. So you have to kind of strike that even balance. Now, the LSS chassis that we have here has all its edges are nicely rounded. It really has a nice feel in the hands, and I wouldn't have problems with using this chassis on a hunting rifle. You've got the nice short forend, but you still have a nice spot to grab onto up here to throw it up in the shoulder and shoot. So not so much between the aluminum and composite chassis. I don't see a whole lot of trade-offs. When you go to wood, there really is not a whole lot of reason other than nostalgia to have a rifle with a wood stock now. Wood just gets banged up out in the field. It really is not resistant to temperature. It's not resistant to solvents. It causes all kinds of problems. So I do love old military rifles that have the old wood stocks on them, but if you have an old military rifle that has actually been used, take a look at that stock and see how beat up that stock is. And now you know why going forward everything is composite or aluminum or plastic, because it just holds up so much better to field conditions. Again, I like wood for classic purposes, nostalgic purposes. My 40XB still has a wood stock on it. Obviously my 1903 Springfield, my M1 Garand, those all have wood stocks on them, and I love shooting them. But for a modern tactical rifle, chassis like this, aluminum chassis or aluminum chassis dressed up with plastic, or the fiberglass composite stock systems, those are the way to go. Steer clear of the wood for anything that you're actually going to get out and use. Sean asks, one of the constant things I hear about rifles is the trigger. Can you explain how a bad trigger can influence the shot? Well, Sean, the trigger is your mechanism to tell the bullet to go down range. The critical thing about precision rifle shooting is making sure that you break the shot when you need to break the shot, and then that you maintain follow through as that bullet exits the bore so that you don't disrupt the system at all. When you start getting into some low quality triggers, you can run into issues where the weight is too heavy, and if the weight's too heavy, then you're really straining to break that shot. You may be more prone to rushing the shot or pushing a bad shot because you just want to get that shot off. Also, if you're talking about really heavy triggers like 8-9 pound triggers, then you're talking about stuff where you're just going to get really fatigued with that trigger finger, and it's going to be difficult to maintain precise trigger control as you get later on in a shooting session. Now, other triggers like gritty triggers or triggers that have long over travel, again, it makes it difficult to break that shot right in the respiratory pause. It makes it really difficult to get the shot off quickly and accurately. What I find is with rifles that have gritty or heavy or long trigger pulls is I can still get an accurate shot off, but it takes me longer to break an accurate shot than it does with a rifle with a very clean, crisp, and light trigger pull. Now, I don't believe that a super light trigger makes you a better shot. I've had this discussion before with guys. I believe that there is a point of diminishing returns where now that trigger is not going to make you a better shot, but it is going to impose safety concerns in your shooting. If you're a bench rest shooter, it's not a big deal. You're not moving with a loaded rifle. You're not going to be changing positions. You're not going to have to worry about any of that stuff. You're not going to be amped up. You're not going to be in field conditions. Then that's fine. Go with a trigger pull that's measured in ounces. If you shoot tactical rifle competitions, you're generally not going to be moving with a round in the chamber and the bolt locked down, but you will be fine-tuning that position after you've already locked the bolt down. And I have seen guys that will get into position, they'll go ahead, they'll chamber that round, they'll get on the rifle, and they'll be fine-tuning their position when they catch that trigger and send a round down range. And if they're lucky, just lose the points for the shot. If they're not, then they'll send a round somewhere that it didn't need to go, like into windowsills, barricades, other things downrange, and they'll get DQ'd for the stage or DQ'd for the match. So that's why I don't recommend going with ultralight triggers. Stay in the 2 to 3 pound range. If you want to go a little bit lighter than 2 pounds, I'm not going to say you're wrong, but I definitely wouldn't go anything below 1 pound on any kind of trigger that I'm using on a modern tactical rifle. Bench rest, sure, knock yourself out, but for me, I'm going to stay above 2 pounds on my rifles. Timothy asks, what's your preferred hearing protection? Well, I've got a couple of different sets of hearing protection that I use for varying different situations. Most of the time, I'll be using my Peltor Tactical Sport or Tac Sport or Sport Tac. They've gone under a couple of different names. Hearing protection, and that's because those are actually amplified earmuffs. When I'm wearing them, I can turn the volume up and I can hear range commands, I can hear other shooters, I can have conversations and hear everything much better because I'm a little bit hard of hearing to begin with. Those do an excellent job of amplifying ambient sound, but knocking down the noise of gunshots without really clipping. So you can carry on a conversation while there are gunshots going on in the background and it doesn't turn the sound completely off. It just attenuates it so you can still hear what's going on. And those work really, really well. If you don't want to drop the $100 on a set of those, a slightly cheaper option that does a lot of the same stuff is the Howard Light Impact Sport ears. The set that I have, for some reason, they're kind of loose. They don't really hold their setting on my head really well. I thought that was just a characteristic of the cheaper ears, but come to find out, I think I got a lemon because our department bought a whole case of them, and those work just fine. They hold their adjustment just fine. So I think I just got a bad set, and unfortunately, Howard Light has not responded to any of my emails about it. So don't expect a whole lot from customer service from them if you buy a set. But those ears can be found online about in the $50 range. So they're a really good option. I use those for a lot of handgun shooting because they're just a cheaper set. They fold up a little bit more compact, and I leave them in my handgun range bag. Now, the one drawback to electronic earmuffs is on really hot days, they just add to the misery of the situation. Your ears get hot, you sweat underneath them, and there's really no way to get any airflow through. So if it's really hot and really miserable, then what I will usually switch over to is a set of Surefire EP7 earplugs. And these earplugs are also noise attenuating earplugs. So if you're sitting here having a conversation with somebody, then the low intensity noise will come through the plugs, but it helps block out gunshots. Now, one advantage of them is if you get into a really high noise situation, they do have plugs inside the earplugs that you can close off that valve, and you can block a whole lot more of that noise out. So if I'm shooting in a situation where all of a sudden now I've got a barrier next to me or I've got a tin roof over top of me, then I can go ahead and close off that valve, and I can get a little bit extra noise blocking ability from those plugs. And they come with a little neck cord, so you can put them on neck cord if you want. I generally don't do that because it ends up tickling the back of my neck and bugging the crap out of me. But those are a really good option. Now the EP7s, they have a foam deal that goes in the ear canal instead of the flanged ones like the lower end Surefire earplugs. I've shot some of the lower end earplugs, I believe it's the EP3s and maybe the EP5s. I can't remember the numbers on the lower ones, and I can tell you they do not work really well for high power rifle in any kind of closed in environment. The EP7s are the minimum that I would recommend for shooting these rifles, especially if you're shooting under a roof or around concrete benches or anything like that. I really had almost written them off until I got a set of the EP7s when we were down at SHOT, and they work very, very well. And for traveling ear protection, if I'm going somewhere and I'm not actually going to be shooting a match kind of deal, those are my preference, because I can throw them in my shooting bag, I can throw them in my pocket. They're easy to carry around, and they are fairly inexpensive. If I recall right, they're under 20 bucks on Amazon, and you've got a couple of different sizes to choose from. So those are some really good options. Now, going back to the Peltors, if you decide you're gonna drop the cash on the Peltors, then go ahead and spend the extra 50 bucks and upgrade to the gel ear seals. The gel ear seals are so much nicer than the foam that they come with. It changes them to an almost totally different feeling for the hearing protection. You think you just upgraded to a totally different set when you put those gel ear seals in. I can't believe that I waited so long when I got mine to upgrade them. So I really recommend, even though you're already dropping $100 on the ears to begin with, spend the extra 50 bucks and get a set of the replacement gel ear seals for them. Our next question comes from Alex. Do you use different trigger technique or position between your precision rifle and sidearm? Well, Alex, I don't use a different trigger position. I still get that trigger right on the pad of my finger between the tip and the first joint here. So I try to get that lined up just perfectly in there. Now, the trigger technique between a semi-automatic handgun and a semi-automatic rifle is still fairly close. You don't want to be ganking that trigger. If you start to side load the trigger one direction or another, it's really more noticeable on a pistol than it is on a rifle. On a rifle, when you're shooting off a bipod and you have the rear of the rifle supported by your support side hand, then that little bit of loading from side to side, it's going to affect your groups downrange, but it's not going to cause a miss off a target like it would with a handgun. So you can get away with a little bit more with the rifle when you are, shooting coarse, close up, and fast than I think you can with a pistol. But in general, the principle, the breathing, the trigger press, the follow through, reset, all that is the same with a handgun as it is with a rifle. I don't consciously do anything different between the two. So I hope that answers your question on that. Mike asks, my 20-inch 308 will not group with 175 grain bullets, factory match, or hand load ammo. I'm using Reloader 15. Do I try a different powder or just move on to 168 grain? Maybe the gun itself. It's a Remington 700 in an XLR element chassis, 1 in 10 twist, shooting just over 1 to 2 MOA with 175 and 178 grain. That's the best I could get out of the ladder test. My bone stock Tikka outshoots this gun easily. Where do I start? Well, Mike, first of all, I would start by going back to factory ammunition. If you call a service department at a rifle company and tell them your rifle's not shooting with your hand loads, they're going to be a little bit dubious, because there is a really good chance that there are a lot of guys out there that are screwing hand loads up. Now, I'm not saying this is the case with you. I'm not saying that you're screwing your hand loads up. But if you're trying to troubleshoot a rifle, troubleshoot it with factory ammo and troubleshoot it with known good factory ammo. My suggestion is 168 grain Federal Gold Medal match, 175 grain Federal Gold Medal match, 168 grain Black Hills Gold, 175 grain Black Hills match. Those are some really good options to shoot through that rifle to see what it's doing. Shoot both 168 and 175. But with that 1 in 10 twist barrel, it should favor the 175s a little bit more over the 168s. So try them both. If you are really not getting good performance out of any of that factory ammunition, then it's time to call the warranty department and find out what's going on. Now, before you call the warranty department, though, what I suggest you checking and making sure that your stock is torque to spec. You want to be somewhere between 65 to 45 inch-pounds on your front and rear action screws on that, and make sure that the action is seated to the rear when you're torquing it down into that chassis. And I say seated to the rear because the forces of recoil are going to push that barrel in action back. So you want to make sure that you've taken up any kind of slack whatsoever before you torque those action screws down. Real simple way to do that is take the rifle. When you've snugged down those screws, don't torque them to full spec, just snug them down and just drop it on the ground a couple of inches just to get a little bit of thump to seat that action back in the chassis, and then finish by torquing them down to spec. 45 to 65, I generally stick on the high side around 65 inch-pounds, but anywhere from 45 to 65 is good to go. So if you get everything back in there, you make sure everything's torqued down, you're at 65 inch-pounds and you are still not getting good accuracy, I'd say then give Remington a call and find out what they can do for you. Worst comes to worst, take it to a local gunsmith and have them scope the barrel, take a look, see if the chamber is cut correctly, if the throat looks good, if the rifling is good, because you may have got a lemon, you never can tell. And that, although it will cost you money out of your own pocket, that'll get you a resolution probably a little bit quicker than going off to Remington. And it can give you an idea if the barrel that's on your rifle now is worth keeping, or it may be time to look at upgrading that barrel. We have heard of lemons from time to time. We don't see a whole lot out of Remington that won't shoot at least 1 minute angle with match ammunition, but anything is possible. And our last question comes from Mike. How are things with the Vogel trigger on the 17? Mike, we are wrapping up the review of the Vogel trigger. I don't have it out here with me because when I was prepping for the show, I didn't set the gun out, but it has worked great. We've got a couple of matches under my belt with it. It has been 100% reliable with the 5-pound striker spring that we put in there. So no problems at all with that. Even shooting defensive ammunition is a very smooth, very nice trigger. I've been very impressed with it. No complaints with it whatsoever. And we should have the full review here done very soon, starting with the write-up on the website, and then we'll get the video review done. We just need to get out and get a little bit more video footage of me shooting the thing, and then we'll be ready to roll with that. But right now, I can definitely give it a thumbs up. I can definitely recommend the Vogel competition trigger from GlockTriggers.com. It has worked absolutely perfectly in our Gen 4 Glock 17. So if you want to check that out, we'll leave a link to that down below in the description. When we do finish the full review on it, we're going to go through and we're going to measure the trigger pull with all of the striker springs that they included. So that way we'll be able to tell you what kind of trigger pull difference you're looking at between the factory striker spring, which would be the heaviest, and the lightest of the Glock triggers. And I actually want to get some time. This is one of the things that's holding the review up. I need to get some time out and put the lightest striker springs in and shoot some ball ammo and shoot some defensive ammo and see if we can get it to run with the absolute lightest spring in it. So I'm really curious to see about that. And that will all be in the final write-up. And that's all for the questions that we have today. I hope you guys have enjoyed the show. If you have, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe. If you got any questions or comments, put them in the comment section below or send them to us on Facebook or Twitter. And until next time, the LSS? The review on the LSS is coming up. We've shot all of the footage that we need to do. One of the reasons it's sitting here is because we actually need to shoot this section of it still. But the LSS chassis has done just great. We are wrapping this up and we will get the review out to you guys. There are only a few little things about the LSS that I'm going to comment on in the review, or that are drawbacks for the review. Everything else about it I really enjoyed. I wish I had a 16-inch barreled bolt action to drop in here, because this thing really begs for a little compact barrel and action. But without getting into what I want to cover in the review, I can tell you I have had a lot of fun with this little guy. It is a really great chassis to play with, really great chassis if you're looking for something lightweight and minimalist. So keep an eye out for the full review on that. And until next time, get out and shoot!